5 Encounters with UFOs and Aliens. July 1983, Mount Vernon, Missouri. A couple were puzzled by bright silver flashes coming from a pasture across the road from their farmhouse. Grabbing a pair of binoculars, they were startled to see 2 small silver-suited humanoids that appeared to be running their hands over a black cow that was lying on its side, not moving. The small beings moved their hands in odd jerky movements, and suddenly the cow rose straight up and floated with the beings into a silvery cone-shaped object on the ground nearby. The object's surface was like a mirror and reflected everything around it. Standing by a ramp on the object was a tall reptilian figure that had glaring eyes slit by vertical pupils resembling a snake. Standing on the other side of the craft was a taller and heavier hairy creature resembling a Bigfoot-type being, that also had vertical yellow slits and round green eyes. As soon as the being entered the object with the black cow, it disappeared. Giant space brains. This bizarre case involves the abduction of a young man by a pair of large, blue, brain-shaped beasts, which he and a friend claimed were blocking the desolate stretch of road in front of his car. In the dead of night on August 17, 1971, a pair of Palos Verdes natives, Peter Rodriguez and John Hodges, both of whom were in their late 20s, claimed to have come across 2 ostensibly alien creatures that were quite unlike anything else recorded in the annals of ufology or cryptozoology. According to their account, at approximately 2 a.m., the duo left the home of a mutual friend, who lived on nearby Dapplegray Lane, at which point they climbed into Hodges' car. Hodges started the engine, flicked on the headlights, and was about to drive off when the men simultaneously noticed a pair of what can only be described as huge, disembodied brains lying about 6 feet in front of them in the middle of the road. Rodriguez and Hodges later asserted that the brains were bluish in color and were shrouded by a strange, localized vapor. They described one of the creatures as being approximately the size of an overgrown softball, while the second one had the dimensions of a human torso and, most startlingly, seemed to have a red, eye-like organ wedged into the center of its frontal lobe. Rodriguez and Hodges' puzzled demeanor quickly gave way to fear, and within moments they sped away from these bizarre beings. The men lived in the same neighborhood as their friend, so the journey was a brief one. Hodges first dropped off Rodriguez and then made his way home. Once he arrived at his house, he noticed, much to his consternation, that the time was 4:30 a.m. This was a journey that Hodges had made many times in the past, and for the life of him he could not figure out how a 10-minute trip had turned into a 2-hour odyssey. He would find out soon enough. Anyone familiar with cases of alien abductions will surely be aware of a phenomenon known as missing time. Alleged abductees claim that missing time often occurs following an extraordinary sighting of lights in the sky, UFOs landing, or, in the case of Hodges, blue brains in the street. Individuals who believe they were abducted by aliens tend to wake up, often dazed and disoriented, only to find themselves engaged in the same activity they were occupied with when they first saw the anomalous objects. These individuals may not realize anything has happened at first, but soon after they discover that hours, or even days, have elapsed with no record of it in their memories. Some people are able to dismiss this as absurd, and others are haunted by their experiences but are simply too apprehensive to come forward for fear of being labeled as mentally incompetent and therefore socially stigmatized. Still others are unable to live with the mystery that consistently gnaws at the back of their minds, and they seek help. Such was the case with John Hodges. In 1976, after 5 long years of wrestling with his memory of the blue brains and wondering about what happened during those lost hours, Hodges finally decided to undergo hypnotic regression in the hopes of uncovering what had happened to him after he had separated from Rodriguez on that fateful night. This method, though undeniably controversial, is employed by many psychologists to help recover memories that are otherwise buried deep in the psyche. It is also one of the most popular techniques used to elicit repressed memories in alien abductees. The first thing that Hodges recalled while under hypnosis was that the larger brain had spoken to him telepathically on Dapple Gray Lane, stating, "Take the time to understand yourselves, the times are drawing near when you will need to. You shall not remember this incident until we meet again." During the session, Hodges recounted that he had dropped Rodriguez off without incident and then returned home. Upon his arrival, he was terrified by the sight of the two big blue brains waiting for him outside his house. At this point, Hodges apparently lost consciousness because his next memory was of waking up in what he referred to as a control room. This control room was lined with what seemed to him to be computer consoles. Hodges noticed that the brain creatures were nearby, along with a cadre of creatures that were even more terrifying. Hodges stated under hypnosis that he was confronted by a group of bald, thin-lipped, 7-foot-tall, gray-skinned humanoids with no less than 6 webbed fingers and toes. These strange humanoids made it clear that the blue brains were nothing more than organic translation devices, which enabled them to converse telepathically with human beings. Following this explanation, these visitors from out of this world showed Hodges holographic images depicting a series of nuclear explosions and a television-like screen upon which were pinpoints of light. The larger brain explained to the frightened Hodges that the points represented places on Earth where there was too much power. He was also shown images of another planet that had been destroyed due to the fact that it also had too much power. On March 17, 1978, Risley, Cheshire, England. An engineer driving near a local atomic energy reactor spotted a strange figure in the car headlights. The figure appeared to be climbing down an embankment, stooping with its arms stretched out. It was described as 7 feet tall and silvery with a dark head. It walked into the road and stopped. It then turned towards the witness, illuminating him with 2 slim beams of light that came out of his eyes. After a minute, the creature crossed the road and walked straight through a 10-foot-high security fence topped with barbed wire. The witness then drove home, extremely shaken. November 1961. Minot, North Dakota. November was a horse month. Twilight in 1961, Paul Miller and 3 associates were on their way home from a hunting rest close to Minot, North Dakota. Suddenly, something they described as a considerably tub landed in the meeting region. They believed that it was a seaplane that had landed, but they were close to 50 pence apiece. Their minds were in the function of the Lucky Charm suddenly used up. The Lucky Charm reappeared and 2 humanoids stepped out of the product in the function of the 4 determined to trip available. Miller, who was stuck by the alarm clock, thumped one of the beings, most probably injuring it. The sec is fleeing on the way to set. Miller and his troop had a blackout and were at a loose end for 3 hours. They then determined not to arrive at the lie down to part. At the function of Miller, at his part, at the air spirit, he was visited by 3 men taking part in black suits. They pretended to be from the dictatorship and began asking questions about his conflict, and Miller recited that it seemed that they knew something about me, and that they, I imagine beforehand, knew my answers. It appeared that they were more interested in being clothing. Miller had eroded at the reason for the conflict, and the men who followed Miller were set to snatch air at them. The men were ready with such a depressing picture of Miller that he didn't take the liberty to arrive at his lie down for a choice of verve. The higher figurine is a style. Giant humanoids, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, August 28, 1963. Grateful for their land and treasures, humans drive one-eyed giants to extinction by greedy humans. While such beings may not seem out of place in legendary Albion, one would hardly expect to find them flying around modern-day Brazil in UFOs. Nevertheless, a close encounter case from the 1960s suggests that ancient mythic archetypes may occasionally resurface in our own space-age folklore. On the evening of August 28, 1963, a 10 feet wide transparent globe appeared above a house in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, much to the surprise of 3 young boys playing in the back garden. Inside the glowing sphere stood 4 7-feet-tall humanoids. They wore brown diving suits and transparent bubble-shaped helmets. The craft projected 2 shafts of light down to the ground, and one of the entities glided down to Earth between the beams. It lumbered towards the boys, gesticulating and jabbering loudly. The giant had no ears or nose and only a single large brown eye. It was completely hairless, and its face had a ruddy complexion. 12-year-old Fernando Gualberto picked up a stone to throw at it, but was forced to drop it when the entity fired a beam of light at his hand from a box on its chest. The giant briefly renewed its attempts to communicate with the boys. Then it floated back up into the sphere, which sailed away over the rooftops. The boys' parents later discovered a set of triangular indentations in the ground where the entity had walked.